Opening the center, this pawn thrust immediately stakes a claim and prepares for development. Embracing a solid, defensive posture, black signals a positional struggle rather than an immediate tactical clash. Asserting central dominion, white immediately stakes a claim, inviting black to define their pawn structure and fight for space. Challenging the center immediately ignites central tension and opens lines for piece development. Developing a knight here immediately pressures black's central pawn and prepares for kingside castling, a classic French defense maneuver. Releasing central tension immediately simplifies the position, potentially favoring development over immediate material advantage. Regaining the pawn with the knight secures central control and prepares for rapid development. Developing the knight to d7 strengthens the e5 square and prepares for potential, ngf6, aiming for a more robust pawn structure. Developing knights toward the center bolsters white's pawn control and prepares for kingside castling, aiming for a safe king. Developing the knight to a more active square, the nascent kingside assault begins its preparation, eyeing central influence. Opening up the f-file for potential queen pressure, this exchange simplifies the position while also creating doubled pawns for black, a long-term structural weakness that might be exploited later. Re-establishing the knight on f6 immediately bolsters central pawn control and prepares for kingside castling, a wise reaction to the forced exchange. Developing the bishop to d3 now aims to connect white's rooks and prepare for castling, while also placing pressure on black's central pawn structure and potentially targeting weaknesses on the kingside. Challenging white's central pawn structure, black immediately seeks to unravel the kingside's static grip and open lines for counterplay. Opening the center with this pawn grab disrupts black's intended central control and immediately creates imbalanced pawn structures. Observe how white's pieces now have greater freedom of movement, potentially leading to quick development and an initiative if black isn't careful with their recapture. Reclaiming the pawn with the bishop immediately challenges white's centralized pieces and creates a dynamic tension in the center, forcing white to react decisively. Bringing the queen to a central, active square now prepares for potential kingside operations and solidifies control over the d4-e5 diagonal, subtly threatening further pawn advances. Securing the pawn on c5 and preparing for central expansion with a future e5 push, while also developing the queen to a more active square where it can eye the kingside. Securing the monarch by tucking it away behind a pawn shield allows white to focus on developing the remaining pieces and potentially launching an assault on the queenside, while also clearing the way for the rook to participate in the middle game skirmishes. Securing the monarch into its cozy castle dramatically enhances king's safety, preparing for potential middle game skirmishes and offering a tactical breathing room after the pawn structure adjustments. Challenging the central tension, the bishop boldly steps onto the diagonal, eyeing the knight and indirectly pressuring the queen's defense of the c5 pawn. Simplifying the position by offering to exchange the bishop for the knight on f6 appears to be the idea, but it concedes control of the d5 square and opens lines towards the king for white's active pieces. Instantly claiming control of the open d-file, this maneuver aims to exert pressure on black's central pawn structure and potentially target the d5 square if black allows it to become weak. Shifting the bishop to d7 consolidates black's pawn structure and prepares for potential counterplay on the queenside, while also creating a safer haven for the king should white's pieces venture too deep into black's territory. Knight advancing to the center, eyeing the f7 weakness and potentially controlling key squares. Reclaiming the d-file with this rook signals a desire to contest control and challenge white's central presence. Indeed, the bishop on g5 now feels a touch less comfortable. Opening the c-file aims to challenge black's central pawn structure and gain active control over the board's diagonal traffic, while simultaneously preparing for a potential kingside assault by repositioning pieces. Solidifying the bishop's central presence, black repositions this piece to a more active square where it directly pressures white's queenside pawns and prepares to contest the now open c-file, potentially rerouting itself to a more influential diagonal. Unveiling an attack on the f6 knight, this piece repositioning aims to disrupt Black's development and potentially expose their king. Challenging the bishop's central dominion, this maneuver initiates a dialogue regarding control of the d6 square, subtly testing the integrity of White's pawn chain and the placement of the knight. The pawn's advance creates an intriguing new crossroads, forcing the bishop to relocate and potentially opening up the d-file for a later rook sortie, while simultaneously challenging Black's knight and threatening to disrupt the queenside structure if not addressed. Recapturing that bishop immediately solidifies Black's central presence, but it also invites a potential pawn storm from White's c-pawn, which now has a clear path to advance. Observe how the pawn structure is about to dramatically shift, potentially opening lines towards the king. Suddenly, the knight leaps to a powerful outpost, aiming directly at the f6 square and threatening the Black king's safety, while simultaneously creating potential for devastating discovered attacks and disrupting Black's pawn structure with an eye towards a queenside invasion. A daring attempt to untangle the pieces and create a central threat, but it overlooks the immediate danger to the king and the exposed knight on the queenside. The pawn push on c5 created a significant weakness that the current knight placement doesn't adequately address. You're inviting a tactical skirmish where White's piece coordination looks much more harmonious, especially with the bishop eyeing the king's flank and the rooks poised to dominate open files. Consider the potential for a swift counterattack aimed at your uncastled king. Suddenly, White has snatched a piece, but the queen's repositioning hints at a deeper tactical trap involving potential piece sacrifices to expose the king. The rook's return to its starting square, a crucial repositioning, immediately addresses White's aggressive knight foray and secures the pawn structure, re-establishing a solid defensive perimeter around the king. Targeting the weak light squares around Black's king now becomes paramount, as the recent exchange of pieces has cleared the central paths for White's bishop to exert pressure, potentially disrupting Black's defensive coordination and opening avenues for a future kingside assault. A crucial decision point arrives as the knight boldly ventures into the center, immediately challenging White's pawn structure and disrupting any complacent piece arrangements. This maneuver aims to exploit the slight disarray in White's ranks following the recent pawn capture and knight sacrifice, seeking active counterplay before White can consolidate. Seizing the opportunity presented by Black's exposed king, White initiates a daring sacrificial sequence designed to rip open the kingside and create immediate attacking chances. Sacrificing material to expose the enemy king often creates immediate tactical chances, and here, the king finds itself in a perilous position with few safe squares. Unleashing a powerful discovered attack on the Black monarch, this check forces a critical decision for the Black player, exposing a significant weakness around the king's current shelter. That king now finds itself exposed on the 8th rank, a magnet for White's active pieces, while the pawn on g6 offers Black a deceptive sense of counterplay that may prove illusory given the precarious state of his monarch. A calculated sacrifice to shatter the enemy's royal defenses, exposing the king with a devastating discovered attack on the f-file. Black's king now finds itself exposed to a dangerous array of attacking pieces, a direct consequence of accepting the pawn sacrifice on g7. The immediate concern is how to consolidate defenses and redirect attacking forces, as the seemingly material advantage is overshadowed by the critical need to secure the monarch. Unleashing a powerful discovery, the White Queen forces the Black King into an even more precarious situation, aiming to exploit the exposed diagonals and create mating threats. The Black King's escape route is now severely compromised, a direct consequence of the earlier material exchange and the subsequent pawn push that opened lines. Reinforcing the attacking potential down the open d-file establishes a clear objective, aiming to penetrate the weakened queenside and exploit the exposed Black monarch's precarious situation. The knight's audacious leap to e3 ignites a tactical tempest, forcing White's queen into an awkward retreat and potentially opening a diagonal for Black's bishop. The pawn chain shatters, exposing the king's inner sanctum to a relentless diagonal assault. The bishop's repositioning aims to create counterplay by challenging white's advanced knight and potentially opening lines towards the vulnerable king, a desperate attempt to inject life into a deteriorating position after the tactical melee. Unleashing a powerful discovered check, white forces the black king into a perilous corner, aiming to exploit the compromised pawn structure and exposed royal defenses.